right. Hello. No one is at my presentation, so that's okay. I'm going to present anyway, and I welcome if you listen to my recorded presentation. First of all, my name is Nicole. I'm a certified dental assistant and I work part-time in the dental assisting program here in BC. The topic that I'm going to be presenting today is on how the foods that we eat can directly affect our brain function. So this topic really interested me because I've gone through phases of my life where I've paid very close attention to what I ate, eating very healthy. I've made notes on every day how I felt throughout the weeks, throughout the months, not just how my body felt, but how my mind felt as well. And as you can imagine, they were all very positive ways of how I felt. Lately, I haven't been eating the best to nourish my body, but really kind of eating more out of convenience. Life gets busy, and I've noticed a lot of brain fog and really not being able to concentrate as well as I used to. So I do know that food affects brain function and my cognition, but I really wanted to understand the science and the research behind how that actually worked. So I'm going to share my screen with you and I will start the presentation. All right, so food and the brain, how the foods we consume directly affect our brain. So first, I would like to acknowledge the lands that I am coming from right now. I live in Cranbrook, BC, which resides on the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa people. I acknowledge that I have the privilege of working, learning, living, and playing on the traditional homelands of the Ktunaxa and Kinbasket people. It is a privilege for me to learn, share, and practice on this traditional territory, and I am very grateful for this opportunity. So I just want to go over the agenda real quick of what the presentation looks like. First, we're going to talk about brain composition as it pertains to nutrition. Then I'll dive into the gut-brain connection, the nutrients and foods that benefit the brain's function, foods that aid in the decline of cognitive function, how you can change your food choices for the better, then on to question and answer portion and references. We won't have question and answer because we don't have anyone here, but the references as well will be at the end. So our brain makes up only 2% of our body weight, but it can actually demand more than 20% of our available energy. So we often think about fueling our bodies in order to function, but we also need to fuel our brains for function as well. In the textbook, Facilitating Learning with the Adult Brain in Mind, they talk about how when you're working on a challenging problem, you may tend to reach for a snack because thinking takes effort and effort requires energy. The brain needs to replenish and wants to reward itself for working so hard, but we need to ensure that we are grabbing for the right snacks in order to restore the energy that will actually benefit us in the long term. So to better understand what we should be eating and why, we need to understand the nutritional contents of the brain. About 75% of the brain is made up of water, which is extremely important in order for neurons to fire. So water loss can happen if you're outside on a hot day or doing an intense workout. If this water does not get replenished, you will experience a decrease in your ability to think and perform mental operations. So water serves a great importance in the brain's cognition, but that's just kind of as far as I want to dive into hydration for the purposes of this presentation. I did find a really good podcast on how water affects brain function as well. You can find it on the Huberman Lab podcast by Andrew Huberman. He breaks it down really well. So if we were to strip the brain of all of the water, what would remain for nutritional components would be mostly fat or lipids. And that's actually about 60% of our brain is made up of fat. So it's not like the fat in the rest of our bodies or kind of the fat that may reside around our midsection. So unlike our bodies, the brain doesn't actually store fat. The brain has structural fat layers in between neurons. So if you look at the image pictured on the right, it actually shows a nerve cell. And in between each neuron is a branch called myelin. Myelin is covered in fatty substances. So these fats and lipids that make up a large portion of our brain. Neurons transmit signals along these myelin covered branches, and they are what allow us to think. They transmit those signals. So the foods that we eat provide the structural basis for the building blocks of these neurons. So along with fats, the additional nutritional content of the brain is made up of proteins, amino acids, glucose, and micronutrients. Proteins are the building blocks of growth and development for the brain. They control how we feel and how we behave. Amino acids are the chemical messengers that allow neurons to pass messages between each other. They can affect mood, sleep, and attentiveness. Micronutrients consist of antioxidants that fight off free radicals that actually destroy brain cells. So vitamins and minerals that help specifically with this are B6, B12, and folic acid. Glucose, or sugar, is needed by both the body and the brain for energy. So most glucose intake comes from carbohydrates. The type of carbohydrates, however, is very important. So the frontal lobe of the brain, which is located just behind the forehead, is very sensitive to drops in glucose levels. So for example, or increases in glucose levels. So for example, when you eat white bread, there's too much sugar being released all at once that the frontal lobe actually can't handle it. And that's when we experience that crash. On the other hand, if we eat more complex carbs, such as oats, grains, or legumes, the glucose or the sugar is released at a much slower rate, which results in steadier levels of attentiveness, and we don't get that sugar crash. That's kind of the Reader's Digest version of the nutritional content of the brain. And that's going to kind of provide the basis of what foods we need to eat to sustain our brain's function and to improve our cognition. Okay, so how does the food we process in our stomachs connect to our brain? In 1875, Ernest and Edward Weber discovered that the gut and the brain had a link via the vagus nerve. So many neuroscientists after them have done a lot more studies on this nerve and have found that it travels from numerous organs in the digestive system up to what is called the nodose ganglion that resides at the base of the skull. Neurons within this ganglion can detect nutrient deficiency. So stimulation of this vagal nerve is also known to enhance memory and improve working memory performance. A few ways that this nerve can be stimulated is by meditating, focusing on breathing, exercise, and just finding ways to relax. Diego Bojarez is the neuroscientist who uncovered what is now called neuropod cells. So neuropod cells are cells that form synapses with nerves in the mucosa of the small intestine. The existence of these cells have been confirmed by Melanie Kilberger, who revealed that these cells connect with the neurons of the vagal nodose nerve to transduce a sense from the gut directly to that brain. So those neuropod cells are really important in kind of figuring out what's in our stomach and how that's going to affect our brain function. Andrew Huberman of the Huberman Lab has broken this down into kind of a simpler term. So these neuropod cells are neurons in the mucosal lining of the small intestine and the gut. They respond to amino acids, sugars, and fatty acids. So as food starts to digest, these neurons are figuring out what's available and sending electrical signals up to the brain. Once these signals get to the brain, they trigger a release of dopamine. Dopamine is involved in memory, attention, and it inspires motivation and reward. And what it does is it wants to seek out whatever it was that triggered that release. So eating a chocolate bar will trigger the release of dopamine quite quickly. But as I discussed earlier, too much sugar all at once can cause that frontal lobe to get overloaded, and then we get that sugar crash. So it's really not helping in sustaining that long-term attentiveness. So really what we need to do is we need to have a healthy gut microbiome that will allow these neuropod cells to work in a way that seeks out amino acids, fatty acids, and sugars from healthy foods rather than those convenient sugary foods, so that we can activate that release of dopamine. So let's talk about the actual foods that benefit our brain. First, we are going to discuss the essential fatty acids, specifically omega-3s. So I always struggle to say this word, docosahexaenoic, or DHA, is a lipid or a fat that holds extreme importance to the brain. So if you recall from before, the nutritional makeup of the brain is 60% fat. About 30% of that fat is DHA. It's crucial to learning, memory retention, and overall brain health. The body cannot make its own, so it is very important to get it from foods that we eat, or from dietary supplements. It's important to note that this is probably the most important nutrient that's required for brain function, but it's actually found that most people are not getting enough of it. So sources of omega-3s include fish and other seafood, specifically fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, tuna, and sardines. We want to kind of stay away from the fish that are higher in mercury. If you're not into fish, or eating animal products, sources like nuts and seeds, such as chia seeds, walnuts, and flax seeds. We can also use plant oils, such as canola oil, flaxseed oil, and soybean oil. Supplements can also be found in the form of fish oil, krill oil, or algae oil. So if you would rather supplements than eat all that fish, then there's ways for that as well. There's many foods out there now that are also fortified with DHA and omega-3s, such as yogurt, juices, and soy beverages, in order to increase the intake of these nutrients. I found as well that infant formula is fortified with DHA because it's so important for the brain development of babies. Phosphatidylserine. I always find that's a fun word to say. So phosphatidylserine is a lipid-like compound. So a lipid is like a fat as well. And it's found in the cell membranes in the brain. So going back again, like I said, to the fat content of the brain and the importance of nourishing it, phosphatidylserine is really important. So instead of maybe struggling to say this word, I'm just going to call it PS. So PS naturally occurs in all cells, but it's mostly found in the brain. Clinical trials have shown that supplementing with PS improves a variety of brain functions. The intake of PS from foods is quite low, meat and fish being the main sources, and cabbage actually being another, which makes supplementing PS a lot more of a benefit rather than trying to eat enough of the meat and fish and cabbage. I don't think a lot of people are eating a whole bunch of cabbage every day. What is interesting about cabbage, though, is that going back to when we talked about the gut-brain connection and having that healthy gut microbiome, and how that influences a healthy brain, fermented foods are important in maintaining a healthy gut. And while eating fermented foods may not be a high priority on most people's lists, sauerkraut may be an easier one for people to digest. And of course, sauerkraut is fermented cabbage. So you kind of get two benefits there. You get the phosphatidylserine from the cabbage, and you get the fermented food, which is good for your gut microbiome, which then sends dopamine signals up into the brain. Trials involving human volunteers started in the mid-1980s and have given results showing that supplementing with phosphatidylserine has benefits on multiple brain functions, such as memory, learning, comprehension, and word recall, or as we now know it or call it, cognition. Next is choline. So choline is the precursor to acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter that carries signals between nerve cells in the brain. So what this means is that the body can process choline into acetylcholine. This makes choline intake important as it strengthens that communication between nerve cells that play a role in memory and learning. And as we know, as things get stronger, we just get better and better and better. So acetylcholine is released from two parts of the brain. It's released from the nucleus basalis, or the basal forebrain, where a cluster of neurons reside that activate focus and concentration. And it's also released from the hindbrain, where neurons live that relate to alertness. So low levels of acetylcholine are associated with memory issues, cognitive decline, dementia, and also Alzheimer's disease. The primary source of choline is found in eggs, specifically the egg yolks. Andrew Huberman talks about a study that he did on eggs and how they actually have all of the nutrients that are required for an organism to grow. His study followed a fertilized egg and watched as the chick embryo grew larger, the yolk actually became smaller and smaller. So I thought that was a really neat study to show the importance of the nutrients of the egg yolk and that it can really sustain a life until it's ready to come out. If you don't eat a lot of eggs, choline can also be found in potatoes, nuts, seeds, grains, and fruit. It's just important to keep in mind that they don't contain as much choline as eggs, so you just have to eat more of them. Creatine. So there is a lot of supporting evidence on the role of creatine in muscles. I'm sure you've probably heard of creatine before from people who are working out and take that as supplementation. It's commonly known in the context of health and fitness because it brings water into the muscles, which enhances strength. There are now some studies that have shown that creatine may also have benefits in brain health. This area of research is still small, but it is growing, and it does show to be to have some promising data. It just needs a little bit more research to fully get that that data full. Here is the breakdown that I got from a review written by Rochelle, Gualano, and others. The brain, much like the body, we know uses energy. The energy in the body is called ATP. So if you recall from earlier, the brain uses about 20% of the body's energy, meaning that creatine can have a positive effect on brain function by helping to add to this energy usage. They have found that creatine deficient syndromes involving brain creatine depletion are characterized by major mental and development disorders, such as learning delays, autism, and even seizures, which may be partially reversed by creatine supplementation. The brain has the capacity to synthesize creatine or make its own, but it can also increase creatine levels by dietary means through that blood-brain barrier. I did find another review written in 2018. There were 6 studies done, 281 people, and they were healthy people with no cognitive imbalances. And that showed evidence that short-term memory, intelligence, and reasoning may be improved by creatine supplementation. Creatine can come from most meat sources or animal products, such as red meat, chicken, fish, salmon, and tuna. But you do have to eat a lot of these foods to get the beneficial amounts of creatine. So that means that 1 pound of meat is equivalent to 1 gram of creatine, and 5 grams of creatine is the amount that is suggested to have any cognitive benefit. So supplementation is usually the better way to go if you want to supplement with creatine. Okay, and then we have anthocyanins. So this is the fifth compound that can benefit the brain, and probably one of my favorites because, as you can see in the pictures, they're delicious. Who doesn't love berries? Anthocyanins are a naturally occurring compound. They're found in red, blue, and purple fruits and vegetables. They are what gives these foods their color. So they exhibit a neuroprotective role due to their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. They seem to have a beneficial effect on neuroinflammation, which is a key process in the progression of some brain diseases. So a neuroinflammatory response can actually lead to Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and autism. The studies have shown that anthocyanins can significantly reduce the chronic inflammatory state. Now, that doesn't mean that it can cure these diseases, but it just has been shown that they can reduce inflammation and then delay the progression of some of these brain diseases. A study done by Mohammed Afzal found that anthocyanins can reduce the amount of DNA damage, thus reducing cognitive decline. Berries that are high in anthocyanins are blueberries, acai berries, goji berries, strawberries, black currants, blackberries, and red and purple grapes. Vegetables that are high in anthocyanins are red cabbage, beetroot, purple yams, eggplant, and red onions. And if you're not into eating berries or purplish vegetables, then you can also supplement with something like a blueberry extract. And the last one on the list of foods that benefit the brain is glutamine. So glutamine is an amino acid that can offset sugar cravings. It can also offset some of the negative effects on cognition that are caused by altitude and oxygen deprivation. So there's not a lot of studies or research that have been done on glutamine and brain function, but there is a review that was written by Quaresma that discusses the relationship between glutamine supplementation and worsening cognition due to high altitude hypoxia. So hypoxia is a lack of oxygen, and in this case, a lack of oxygen due to being in high altitude. So hypoxia through inflammation can affect neurotransmitters in the brain, which then worsen mood and cognition. Glutamine is actually able to reduce that inflammation. Clinical studies are scarce and more research needs to be done, but results could be promising. Maybe wondering why we're talking about this, as you know, it's not very often that we're reaching high altitudes. And we're definitely not sitting in classrooms learning at high altitudes, I don't think. But this research is kind of the pathway to further studies on glutamine supplementation and how it can reduce cognition worsening by inflammation. The other really neat thing about glutamine is the effect that it has on sugar cravings. We often associate sugar cravings with wanting chocolate or a piece of cake, neither of which fall under any of the categories that I have discussed so far. Referring to when I explain the gut-brain connection, our gut has glutamine sensing neurons as well. These neurons send signals to the brain that are signals of satisfaction. And so this is how glutamine can offset those sugar cravings. So if you're craving sugar, get some glutamine in you from something healthy, and it can offset that craving that you're having for that piece of chocolate cake. So foods that contain glutamine include cottage cheese, beef, chicken, fish, dairy products, beans, cabbage, there's that cabbage again, spinach and parsley, or glutamine can also be supplemented. So just to review the foods that benefit the brain, and they kind of go in order of importance and how they affect the brain more so. So the first one is the essential fatty acids. Second is phosphatidylserine. Third is choline. Then we have creatine, anthocyanins, and glutamine. All of these support the structure of the neurons and other cells of the brain that make up our cognition, and they are important for focus and the ability to remember. So those are all great foods that help our cognition, but there's also a lot of foods that increase cognitive decline. They're very popular foods in which I'm sure we all eat at some point throughout our lives. Picture looks pretty delicious if you ask me, along with the other ones that we saw too. But we do need to understand too that we live in a very fast-paced world these days. I think that we're finding ultra-processed foods to be a lot more convenient. They tend to fit into our busy schedules much easier than taking an hour or so to cook that good home cooked meal at home with healthy ingredients. Definitely not saying that that's the case for everyone, but I do, however, notice that many of our students that come into the program would rather opt to eating something quick, whether it's fast food or something prepackaged or a quick snack. Maybe it's not so healthy, than cook or bake something fresh or from home from healthy ingredients. I can't say that I blame them. There's no shame in that. They do have a very full course load, and it's difficult to give away that precious study time to cook a healthy meal when your focus is on studying for the next exam or evaluation. But the research definitely does show that this is detrimental to cognitive function and may actually be slowing down their ability to learn in the long run. There was a study done with the Brazilian Longitudinal Study of Adult Health that was published in 2022 that studied over 10,000 individuals and the relationship between increased ultra-processed food intake and cognitive decline. After a median of about 8 years, individuals who reported consumption of ultra-processed foods of more than 19.9% of their daily calories had a 28% faster rate of global cognitive decline. So this is the person's ability to think, learn, remember, and solve problems, compared to those who reported consumption of ultra-processed foods below 19.9% of their daily calories. Additionally, those consumed more than 19.9% of ultra-processed foods had a 25% faster rate of executive function decline. And these are the skills that help us manage daily tasks, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. Saturated fats also aren't really good for us. They can be found in red meat, full-fat dairy, and plant-based sources such as coconut oil, palm oil, and some baked and fried foods, especially depending on what oil is used. A study published in 2012 by Morris Evans and others wanted to find the effects of different types of fat and their risk of Alzheimer's disease. What they found was that intakes of saturated fats were positively associated with a risk of Alzheimer's disease. This study showed that people who consumed a large amount of saturated fats had 2 times the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to those who ate much less. This study was performed on individuals 65 years and older who at the beginning were unaffected by Alzheimer's, and then studies showed that they were progressing to Alzheimer's with the increased saturated fat intake. Saturated fats also increase cholesterol in the blood, which has been known to cause cardiovascular disease and stroke. So I think now is a good time to note that heart health is also directly linked to our brain health. So elevated levels of cholesterol can increase the risk of small vessel disease in the brain, which can then eventually lead to cognitive decline, increased risk of stroke and dementia. There's many other foods such as alcohol, sugary drinks, artificial sweeteners, refined carbohydrates. These also can all have a very negative effect on brain health. I didn't want to dive too deep into those as well. I didn't do the research into each one specifically, but I do just think it's important to note that those can have a negative impact on brain function as well. So in short, we want to make sure that we're eating healthy. Whole foods not only fuel our bodies, but they fuel our brains as well. Eating a diverse diet full of fruits, vegetables, fish, nuts, fermented foods, and definitely limiting foods that are ultra processed and contain a lot of saturated fats will help your brain to stay as strong as it can for as long as it can. So I wanted to throw in a few tips on how to improve cognitive function through diet. Maybe your diet isn't the best now. Here are some ways to start thinking about it and make some positive changes. So we always hear that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Food in the morning helps to stimulate the brain right off the hop. So we want to make sure that we are choosing foods that are high in fat, protein, and or fiber. So something like avocado toast or eggs are always a good choice. Protein shakes in the morning are good too. Adding in more omega-3s. So yes, that means fish for the most part. If you're not a big fish eater, you can add flax seeds or walnuts to any meal to increase your omega-3 intake. Add them to a shake, to a smoothie, add them to any other meat or sprinkle them on a salad. Supplements, again, can also be taken for these omega-3s. Choose whole grain breads over white breads. Legumes and fiber-rich fruit can be added into your diet as a healthy snack, or sneak them again into your smoothie or your protein shake. Bake some healthy muffins and throw them in there. Always make sure, I talked a little bit about hydration, but you want to make sure that you're drinking enough water throughout the day. Have a water bottle around you at all times. Take sips throughout the day. Add natural sweeteners. If you're not a big water drinker, try to make it taste a little bit better and a little bit more appealing to you. Lemon, mint, cucumber, those are all really great additions. That also helps to curb those kind of hunger or those sugar cravings. And then you also want to make sure that you're establishing a daily routine for eating. Plan ahead, meal plan, meal prep, have an idea of what you're going to be eating. If you're traveling, make sure you pack something and think ahead about what you're going to snack on. I often find when I'm traveling, we get hungry and we're hungry now, and all of a sudden we find ourselves at a convenience store and it's really not all that convenient for our bodies. So we want to try and stay away from that snack attack. So planning ahead is always really helpful. Yeah, and just make sure that you're trying to make those healthy choices. So that is the end of my presentation. At this point, I would ask if anyone had any questions, and I would try to answer them to the best of my ability with the research that I have. But nobody is here, so I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Here is a list of the references that I used, and thank you again if you are listening to my presentation. Thanks. Bye.